You ever have one of those kids in your elementary school that just seemed to be a prime target for bullies? Well, that kid was me, Jason Miller. The scrawny, bespectacled runt with a love for comics and zero athletic ability. Every damn day was a gauntlet of wedgies, swirlies, and locker stuffings from the resident pack of meatheads. I'd go home covered in mystery stains and bruises, trying my best to dodge Mom's concerned looks. "Jason, honey, what happened this time?" she'd ask, eyes tight with worry. I'd just shake my head and mutter some excuse about tripping on the playground. But deep down, we both knew the truth. After one particularly nasty incident involving a broken arm, Mom decided enough was enough. "We're getting you out of that cesspool," she declared, lips pressed in a grim line. "You're transferring to St. Michael's Academy next semester, a clean slate." I should have been relieved, but part of me dreaded just swapping one set of bullies for another. Little did I know, St. Mike's had its own terrors in store, in the form of an awkward dweeb named Stuart Caldwell. My first day at St. Michael's Academy, I knew I wasn't in Kansas anymore. The pint-sized brick building looked more like a prison than a school. As I lugged my backpack down the cramped hallway, a scrawny kid with a mop of greasy hair and Coke bottle glasses nearly plowed right into me. "Oh man, I'm so sorry," he sputtered, scrambling to collect the books he'd dropped. I bent down to help, studying this kid. His whole aura just screamed newbie virgin. No sweat, happens to the best of us. Handing him the last textbook, our eyes met for an awkward moment. His gaze quickly darted away as he mumbled, "I'm Stuart. Stuart Caldwell." A rueful grin tugged at my lips. This poor bastard was a dead ringer for my former self back in elementary. The branded survivor of childhood ridicule. Jason Miller. Looks like we're going to be bunker buddies in this war zone. Stuart's face broke into a hesitant smile, realizing we were both huddled refugees from the massacre of adolescence. At that moment, I sensed the beginning of a beautiful dorkhood. Stuart and I quickly became inseparable two peas in an unfortunate pod. We had damn near everything in common, from our love of vintage comic books to our complete ineptitude at sports. Not that we didn't try to fit in. One fateful day in gym class, the sadistic coach was forcing everyone to pick athletic teams. Stuart and I inevitably ended up as the last two losers standing. "Caldwell, you're on football," the coach barked, like it was a punishment. Stuart's eyes went wide as dinner plates behind his Coke bottle lenses. But sir, I don't even know the rules." The coach let out a wheezy laugh. "You'll figure it out, string bean. Miller, you're my newest baseball prospect." I gulped hard, flashing back to all those disastrous t-ball games where I couldn't hit the goddamn broadside of a barn. Still, baseball seemed slightly safer than getting mauled on a football field. From then on, Stuart and I became victims of constant hazing and abuse from the meathead jocks. Having our glasses stolen and crushed underfoot was just part of the routine torture. We tried acting nonchalant, but the fear was always palpable. Little did we know, it was about to take a far more sinister turn. As the weeks rolled on, Stuart and I started diverging in how we handled the constant harassment. While he stayed firmly planted in his comfort zone, I began making small adjustments to try blending in better. I traded my thickest spectacles for trendier frames and put a bit more effort into my wardrobe and haircut. Subtle changes, but enough to avert some of the bigger bullies' radar. Stuart, however, remained defiantly stubborn. Every day, I'd watch with a mixture of admiration and horror as the football players took their ritual swipes at him. Their favorite move was violently ripping off Stuart's glasses and playing make-believe quarterback with them. "Go long," Calzone, one of the gorillas, would bellow, hurling the specs down the hallway as Stuart flailed helplessly. I'd slink by with my eyes averted, equal parts relieved and ashamed that I wasn't the current target. In those moments, I felt like I was betraying my friend just to stay under the radar. But I kept telling myself there was nothing I could really do to help Stuart, that he'd brought it on himself by doubling down on his unabashed dweebiness. God, how painfully naive I was back then. Because the sick fucks were just getting warmed up with their twisted games. It started out as just another after-school hazing session. I was changing for baseball practice when I heard the commotion from the locker room, next door grunts, thumps, and Stuart's unmistakable yelps. At first, I tried to drown it out and mind my own business like usual. But then a particularly blood-curdling scream sliced through the cinder block walls. A scream that'll be seared into my brain until the day I'm planted 6 feet under. Without even thinking, I bolted into the football team's locker room, and there was Stewart, curled up in a trembling ball as three of the biggest gorillas took turns kicking the shit out of him. "Hey, break it up," I shouted, feeling as powerless as a kid trying to disarm a landmine. The gorillas barely looked up, sneering. "Beat it, Miller, before you're next." That's when I saw the blood, thick rivulets of it gushing from Stewart's nose and the gashes around his swollen eyes. His clothes were torn to shreds and his glasses were, predictably, being ground into the tile. "See, Mon man, he's had enough," I pleaded. But they just laughed and kept pummeling him with those tree trunk legs. Yielding, I had to pull the coward move and bolt for the nearest teacher before it turned into a murder. By the time help arrived, Stewart's face resembled a fistful of hamburger meat. As they loaded him into the ambulance, he caught my eye with his one remaining inflated orb. In that moment, I knew he'd never be able to trust me again. Stewart was out of school for a couple weeks recovering from that locker room beat down. When he finally returned, the haunted look in his eyes cut me deeper than any words. I tried to approach him a few times to apologize or, I dunno, just connect somehow. But he'd shrink away, curling inward like a terrified pill bug. Deep down, I understood his instinct to shut me out after I failed him so spectacularly. The guilt and shame ate away at my core. Maybe that's why I deluded myself into thinking the worst was over once the three ringleaders got temporarily suspended. Like idiots, we actually breathed a sigh of relief. That reprieve lasted all of about a week, because then the real sick fucks unveiled their masterstroke. It went down right after 7th period let out. I was headed for baseball practice when a tight knot of students clogged the hallway, whispering and staring. Worming my way through, I immediately wished I hadn't, because there was Stewart, naked from the waist down, lying crumpled and sobbing. His junk was literally dripping with some sort of viscous, amber liquid. At first, I wondered if he'd had some kind of horrific accident, until I recognized the sharp, nose-burning stench of super adhesive. The bastards had jumped him, held him down, and applied industrial-strength glue to his most tender areas in a sickening prank. An act of sadism that would have rendered most people catatonic from shock and trauma. I'm hardly proud of it, but I turned and ran like a gutless little bitch, vomiting in a trash can. The sound of Stewart's anguished howls still haunts my nightmares to this day. You'd think after the super glue incident, the depraved fucks would have eased off Stewart for a while. But nope, they just kept doubling down on their sadistic bullshit. About a week after Stewart got out of the hospital, I saw him shuffling down the hallway between classes. Head down, shoulders slumped, just a hollowed-out husk going through the motions. As we passed, I opened my mouth to say something. Anything to let him know I was still his friend, still on his side despite my colossal failures. But the words never made it past my lips. That's when I noticed them, the football team bozos, lingering by Stewart's locker like a pack of hyenas sizing up the wounded gazelle. My gut instantly clenched, urging me to bail before becoming collateral damage. But I didn't. Some sick, twisted part of me needed to bear witness to whatever fresh cruelty they had planned. Maybe deep down, I thought seeing it firsthand would shame me into actually growing a pair next time. Moving closer, I heard the first whiff of snide laughter. Then Stewart's locker door creaked open, and a stream of yellow fluid came raining down all over his clothes and books. It was unmistakable they'd taken turns whizzing inside the vented locker before shoving Stewart in after them. A literal recreation of every teenage guy's worst bathroom-related humiliation. As the putrid waterfall of piss soaked Stewart, I watched his entire body start convulsing with heaving sobs. In that moment, any last shred of adolescent innocence shriveled up and died. I wanted to hate them, to attack them with unbridled rage. But most of all, I hated myself for once again standing frozen as a bystander to such unforgivable cruelty. In the weeks after the locker pissing incident, I found myself drifting away from Stewart altogether. Not because I wanted to, but more out of disgusted self-preservation. See, I'd managed to settle into a tolerable groove with a couple of the less meat-headed kids in our grade. We were by no means cool, but stuck together in that weird safety and nerd herd mentality. Occasionally, Stewart would try to orbit our little group, offering up some innocuous attempt at camaraderie. but we'd just shuffle our feet and avoid eye contact until he slinked away dejected. God, how I hated myself in those moments. Yet I still lacked the goddamn backbone to call out my so-called friends for icing him out like that. Instead, I'd swallow the guilt and make some incredibly shitty rationalization about how Stuart's unrelenting dweebiness basically made him a magnet for abuse, as if that somehow excused watching him get hazed and humiliated every single day. The worst part? Whenever Stuart shot me those hurt puppy dog glances, I knew exactly what they were saying. You're just like all the rest, Jason. A coward who's too scared to stick his neck out for the untouchable kid. And you know what? He was absolutely fucking right. I was worse than the meathead bullies in a way, because at least they owned their sadism openly instead of withdrawing from their supposed friend like a whipped dog. Truth was, I didn't have the plums to face the fact that I'd become every bit the bystander that enabled the cycle of abuse to keep devouring Stuart. It would take hitting literal rock bottom before I finally grew a set. After watching Stuart endure escalating levels of depravity for months on end, I finally reached my limit during our 8th grade year. The proverbial last straw that broke the camel's fucking back. It went down right before winter break. I was taking a purposefully long route to class, trying to avoid the hallway gauntlet of getting accidentally shouldered into lockers. As I rounded a corner, I stopped dead in my tracks. There was Stuart, being surrounded and slowly herded by a mixed clan of football players and shit-heel nobodies looking to get their kicks in. "Where you going?" Loser Breath, one of the gorillas, taunted, using Stuart's torn backpack straps like leashes to yank him along. Stuart's eyes were wide with desperation behind his fresh new glasses. Just leave me alone, please." That pathetic whimper instantly triggered something deep within my reptilian brain. Suddenly, I was flooded with repressed memories of my own humiliations back in elementary school. The kind of soul-crushing shit no kid that age should ever have to experience. In that moment, I realized with fucking blinding clarity staying on the sidelines pretending none of this affected me was just as despicable as enabling the cruelty firsthand. More importantly, it was only perpetuating the cycle for the next batch of damaged kids like Stuart and me to keep getting chewed up and spit out. With a primal roar, I launched myself at the pack of sadistic hyenas and started swinging wild haymakers. Catching them by surprise, I actually managed to bloody a few noses before the inevitable happened. They swarmed me like feral dogs and left me doubled over, wheezing in a dimly lit corner as the final bell rang for classes. Bruised, battered, but strangely, liberated. Because in embracing my role as Omega Outlier, I'd hopefully planted the seeds for others like Stuart to follow. Not that it ended up mattering much, because 2 weeks later the ultimate tragedy struck. It was a few days after Christmas break when I got the call from Stuart's mom. Her voice was trembling and thick with tears as she relayed the horrific news. Stuart had taken his own life, hanging himself in the family's basement after leaving a gut-wrenching suicide note describing months of relentless torment and abuse at the hands of his classmates. How he just couldn't take one more day of the constant ridicule, harassment, and dehumanization. Part of me understood his hopeless decision, even at 13 years old. After watching him suffer unspeakable cruelties for so long, it was almost a relief knowing his nightmare was finally over. The rest of me, however, felt hollowed out and bitterly enraged mostly at myself. Because despite my feeble attempts at defiance in those final days, I'd still failed to reach Stuart in any meaningful way. To let him know that I was in his corner, even if I'd spent most of our friendship cowering in the shadows like a spineless bystander, that no matter how utterly alone he felt, he didn't have to go out like that. Not by a long shot. At Stuart's closed casket memorial, I choked back sobs while clutching the tattered remains of an old comic book he'd lent me ages ago. A piece of him I could never bring myself to return or discard, even after everything that went down between us. As I looked around at the haggard faces in attendance Stuart's devastated parents, a sparse smattering of other solemn nerds, it became resoundingly clear. We were the collateral damage, the human shrapnel left to pick up the pieces in the wake of adolescent barbarity running completely unchecked. In that moment, I made a silent vow to never forget Stuart or his suffering, to instead pay forward the painful lessons about cruelty, courage, and compassion in hopes of sparking real change. Because as tragic as his story was, Stuart's life wouldn't be just another forgotten casualty. Not if I had any say in the matter.